August 1211. Yehuling Pass, 70 miles northeast of modern Beijing. 25,000 Mongol cavalry face 400,000 Jin dynasty troops in a mountain corridor so narrow the Jin vanguard stretches back 15 miles. Genghis Khan has ridden 700 miles from the Karelin River with one objective: break the Jin army before winter locks the passes. The Jin commander, Wanyan Jujin, holds high ground, supply lines from Dating Prefecture, and a numerical advantage of 16 to 1. None of it will matter. By the third day, 300,000 Jin soldiers will be dead in the gorges, and the Mongol Tumans will ride unopposed to the walls of Zhongdu. This is not legend. This is what the numbers in the ground reveal about how 25,000 men destroyed an empire's main field army in 72 hours. Linchong, 2008, which mapped mass grave sites, weapon caches, and cavalry approach vectors that align precisely with textual accounts. These aren't general histories, but primary archival compilations and ground surveys that put boots and bones to the battle narrative. Now back to the information. JB and Subutai take 15,000 west towards Xijing to draw Jin attention. Genghis rides northeast with 25,000, moving at 40 miles per day, remounts included, toward the Juyong Pass approaches. The Jin Western Capital Command, based in Datong, learns of the movement by June through beacon relay but miscalculates the target. Wanyan Jujin, commanding the northern theater, assumes Genghis will strike the fortified pass at Juyong, 90 miles southeast, and marches 400,000 troops, regulars, provincial levies, and Yurshin heavy cavalry into a blocking position at Yehuling, a secondary pass the Jin believe controls the approaches. The pass itself is 1,100 meters above sea level, with slopes rising another 300 meters on both flanks. Forest cover, thin topsoil over granite, summer rains, turning the track to mud. Wanyan Jujin arrives first, early August, and digs in. Rear echelons camp outside the pass entirely, strung along the approach road with inadequate security. The Jin expect a frontal assault and plan to funnel Mongol cavalry into the killing ground, where Jin crossbows, effective range 150 meters with steel prods, and heavy cavalry can pin and crush them. Standard doctrine, tested in campaigns against the Song. Wanyan Jujin has never fought steppe cavalry in mountain terrain. Genghis arrives August 13th, 1211. He does not attack. He sends scout details, arbans of 10 men each, into the ridges above the pass. They map every goat track, every drainage, every section of slope where horses can climb. The Mongols spend 2 days on reconnaissance while the Jin wait in the pass. On August 15th, Genghis divides his force. 5,000 cavalry under Macaulay stay visible at the eastern entrance, demonstrating, shooting at maximum. Range, pulling back, keeping Jin attention locked forward. The remaining 20,000 disappear into the forest. Jin scouts do not go because they assume cavalry cannot operate there. The Yuanxi records the ascent. The army climbed by hidden ways. Archaeological surveys from 2006 and 2008 found horse hoof scars on bedrock shelves above the pass, concentrated along the northern ridge, dating to the early 13th century via associated artifacts: iron stirrup fragments, arrowheads with Mongol tangs, leather scraps with period stitching. The Mongols climbed at night. By dawn, August 16th, 10,000 cavalry sit on the ridges overlooking the Jin main body, invisible in the tree line. Wanyan Jujin orders a cavalry response, sends units up the slopes to dislodge the attackers. The slopes are too steep. Jin heavy cavalry, riding larger horses in lamellar armor, cannot maneuver. They bunch on the tracks, and the Mongols shoot them to pieces. Documented Jin losses in the first engagement: 8,000 cavalry, per the Jin Shur account of the battle. The Mongols lose fewer than 200. Wanyan Jujin pulls his cavalry back and tries to reorient his infantry, but the column is 15 miles long and communication breaks down. At the same moment, the 10,000 on the ridges descend. Not in column, in wave assault across the entire northern slope, hitting the Jin flank along a 2-mile front. The Yuanxi describes it. They came down like a flood. The Jin line folds. Units in the center cannot deploy, cannot maneuver, cannot see their commanders. The pass becomes a kill box. Genghis commits his reserve, another 5,000 from the southern approach, which his scouts found undefended, and now 25,000 Mongols are inside the pass against 400,000 Jin soldiers who cannot fight as an army because the terrain will not allow it. The Mongols operate in tumans and arbans, independent units with clear objectives: cut the column, isolate segments, destroy them. Jin cohesion disintegrates. By midday, August 16th, the Jin army is no longer an army. It is 100 separate groups trying to survive in a 12-mile corridor, while Mongol cavalry ride through them. The largest pit, near the central choke point, contains skeletal remains of at least 1,400 individuals, predominantly male, ages 18 to 45, with trauma patterns consistent with arrow wounds, saber cuts, and trampling injuries. Bone isotope analysis confirms northern Chinese dietary signatures, matching Jin provincial levies. Weapon finds include Jin crossbow mechanisms, iron arrowheads, lamellar plates with Jin stampings, and bronze belt fittings bearing regimental marks from Datong and Dating garrisons. The graves were not given funerary rites. Bodies were piled and covered with earth, quickly, probably by surviving Jin units or local populations after the battle. No coins, no grave goods. This is mass casualty disposal. Genghis does not pursue. He turns south toward Zhengdu. The road is open. By September 1211, Mongol Tumans are raiding within sight of the Jin capital. The Jin cannot field another major army. The northern provinces have been stripped to form the Yehuling force, and it no longer exists. Zhengdu's defense falls to garrison troops and militia. A Jin infantry battalion, standard organization, fields 1,200 men, 800 spearmen, 200 crossbowmen, 200 support. Movement rate on road, 12 miles per day. Off-road, 6 miles per day. A Mongol Tumen, 10,000 cavalry, moves at 35 to 40 miles per day on campaign, with remounts. Each Mongol warrior carries 50 to 60 arrows, a composite bow, a saber, a lance, and rides 2 or 3 horses. The entire unit can shoot on the move, disengage, reposition, and re-engage within an hour. A Jin battalion requires half a day to deploy from march column to combat formation. At Yehuling, the Jin had numerical superiority, but no mobility, no tactical flexibility, no ability to concentrate force in a narrow space against an enemy operating on interior lines from elevated positions. The Jin army at Yehuling required approximately 4,000 tons of grain per week to sustain 400,000 men at starvation rations. Supply line from Dating, 120 miles over mountain roads. Wagon capacity, half a ton per wagon. Transit time, 6 days one way. The Jin needed constant resupply and got it, until Mongol cavalry cut the road on August 16th. The Mongols carried dried meat, millet, and cheese curds. No supply train, no wagons. Each horse could carry 80 kilograms, 60 for the rider and gear, 20 for rations, sufficient for 2 weeks. The Mongols lived off what they brought and what they took. When they killed Jin horses, they ate them. After Yehuling, they had food for a month. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is factual, using sources from the Ziji Tongjian continuation for the Jin period, and cite reports from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences Institute of Archaeology, particularly the 2008 survey directed by Professor Wang Hui that identified weapon distribution patterns, skeletal concentrations, and geological markers proving the Mongol Ridge flanking maneuver. These are not popularizations, but field archaeology and medieval chronicle analysis that reconstruct the battle from physical and documentary evidence. Now back to the information. He has orders to retake Yehuling and secure the passes before winter. He marches east in October with approximately 110,000 troops, survivors from Yehuling plus the reinforcements, and engages Mongol screening forces near modern Zhangjiakou. The Jin Shi calls it the Battle of Huailai, October 14th, 1211. Wanyan Jujin deploys in standard Jin doctrine, center infantry, flanking cavalry, reserves in depth. The Mongols feint retreat, pull the Jin cavalry forward, then hit them from 3 sides with Tumans that have been shadowing the Jin march for 2 days. Wanyan Jujin loses another 20,000 men. He retreats again, this time to Datong, and does not leave the city for the rest of the year. It was the complete destruction of the Jin Northern Field Army by a force 1/16 its size in terrain the Jin believed favored defense. The Jin officer corps, trained in siege warfare and set-piece battles against the Song, has no doctrine for steppe cavalry that climbs mountains, shoots from horseback at full gallop, and operates without supply lines. The Jin Shi records a memorial from General Goshan, commander of Zhongdu garrison, dated November 1211. The enemy moves like fire through grass. We cannot see where they strike until they are upon us. Our numbers mean nothing if we cannot bring them to bear. The Jin government, under Emperor Wei Shaowang, begins negotiations for peace in December 1211. Genghis rejects the terms. He wants tribute, territory, and submission. The war continues. Terrain analysis reveals why Yehuling was fatal for the Jin. The pass runs east-west through a granite massif, 8 to 12 miles long depending on how you measure the approaches, with an average width of 800 meters in the corridor and narrowing to 400 meters at the central choke point. Elevation gain from east to west, 300 meters over 12 miles. The ridges rise an additional 200 to 400 meters above the pass floor. Heavily forested with oak and pine in the 13th century, per pollen core samples from lake beds in the region. The soil is thin, 30 to 60 centimeters over bedrock, which means no fortifications could be dug deep and no earthworks could anchor a defensive line. The Jin positioned themselves in a terrain trap. They assumed the narrow corridor gave them an advantage, forcing the Mongols into a frontal assault. They did not consider that the same terrain prevented them from maneuvering and made them vulnerable to vertical envelopment against other nomadic confederations. The core principle, mobility over mass. A Mongol Tumen divided into 10 jagans of 1,000 men, each jagan into 10 arbans of 100, each arban into 10 pairs. Every unit operated independently within a shared objective. At Yehuling, the objective was to fragment the Jin column and destroy it in pieces. No single Mongol unit engaged more than a fraction of the Jin force at any one time, but every Jin unit was engaged simultaneously by Mongol cavalry that appeared, struck, and vanished before the Jin could respond. The Yuanshi attributes this to Genghis personally. He ordered that no man should mass together, but should strike as the wind strikes from all sides without ceasing. Modern analysts call it distributive warfare. The Mongols invented it. Warriors were expected to hit a moving target at 70 meters while riding at gallop, shooting backwards over the horse's rump, a technique called the Parthian shot. At Yehuling, Mongol cavalry shot from elevated positions, downhill into massed Jin formations. Effective range increased to 250 meters due to gravity assist. Jin crossbows could not return fire effectively uphill against concealed targets, and Jin archers, using simpler wood and bamboo bows with 60 to 80-pound draw weights, could not match Mongol range or rate of fire. The Mongols shot faster, farther, and more accurately from positions the Jin could not reach. Infantry and cavalry, based on mass grave distributions. Route and pursuit phase, August 16th evening through August 18th, 250 to 270,000 per Chinese and Mongol sources. These figures are extreme but archaeologically supported. The mass graves contain 14 to 16,000 identified remains across 7 sites, but ground-penetrating radar surveys from 2009 revealed anomalies suggesting additional burial. Pits, not yet excavated, potentially holding another 20 to 30,000 bodies. Even conservative estimates place Jin losses at 200,000 dead, with another 100,000 scattered, deserted, or captured. The Mongols lost between 1,500 and 3,000 per the Yuanshi. Exchange ratio, 100 to 1, or better. He won with superior doctrine, superior reconnaissance, superior use of terrain, and superior command control. The Jin general, Wanyan Jujin, could not communicate with his rear echelons once the battle started. The pass was too long, the army too large, and Jin command structure too rigid. Orders took hours to reach subordinate units, by which time the situation had changed. Genghis commanded through the Tumen system, which empowered subordinate commanders to act on initiative within the overall plan. Each Tumen leader knew the objective, break the Jin column, and executed it without waiting for orders. This decentralized control allowed the Mongols to adapt in real time, exploiting opportunities as they appeared, while the Jin struggled to respond to attacks they could not predict or counter. Post-battle developments show the strategic consequences. By November 1211, Mongol Tumens control everything north of the Yellow River in Hebei province. The Jin lose 52 prefectures and approximately 3 million subjects in 6 months. Zhongdu, the Jin capital, comes under siege in early 1212, but Genghis lacks siege engines and withdraws after extracting tribute: gold, silk, horses, and a Jin princess for marriage alliance. The Jin Emperor Wei Shaowang, humiliated, flees Zhongdu in 1213 and moves the capital south to Kaifeng. This is interpreted as weakness. Mongol generals Mukhali, Jebe, and Subutai campaign in northern China for the next 4 years, reducing cities and absorbing Chinese engineers who teach siege warfare. Zhongdu falls in 1215, sacked and burned. The Jin dynasty survives until 1234, but after Yehuling, it is never again a great power. Economic data illustrate the collapse. Pre-war, the Jin northern provinces, Shaanxi, Hebei, and southern Manchuria, generated approximately 40% of Jin state revenue, primarily from agriculture and salt monopolies. The Jin Shi revenue tables for 1210 show receipts of 2.3 million taels of silver equivalent from Dading, Zhuanhua, and Datong prefectures. By 1212, revenue from these regions drops to 300,000 taels per fiscal records. Population loss, field abandonment, collapse of trade routes, and the destruction of the tax collecting apparatus. The Mongols do not occupy and administer. They raid, loot, and move on. The Jin cannot rebuild fast enough. By 1215, Jin revenues are at 60% of 1210 levels, and the state is borrowing from merchant guilds to pay the army. Inflation follows. Silver to copper exchange rates, stable at 1 tael to 1,000 when copper coins in 1210, reach 1 to 4,000 by 1216. The Jin economy was not defeated by battlefield loss alone, but by the inability to sustain state functions after losing the agricultural and demographic base of the northern provinces. Cannae, 216 BC. Hannibal's 50,000 destroys 70,000 Romans, a 1.4 to 1 disadvantage. Agincourt, 1415. Henry Lefebvre's 8,000 beat 30,000 French, a 3.7 to 1 disadvantage. Yehuling? Genghis Khan's 25,000 annihilate 400,000 Jin, a 16 to 1 disadvantage. The kill ratio at Yehuling is unmatched in pre-modern warfare, where both sides are organized state armies. Ambushes of tribal forces or massacres of civilians yield higher ratios, but no comparable battle between professional armies shows this level of destruction at this scale of numerical imbalance. The Jin Shi calls Yehuling the greatest catastrophe in the history of our dynasty, and later Chinese historians agree. Jin forces defeated the Song dynasty repeatedly in the 12th century, conquered northern China from the Liao, and maintained the largest standing army in East Asia in 1200, approximately 600,000 regulars plus militia. Jin military academies trained officers in strategy, logistics, and combined arms. The Jin had gunpowder weapons, primitive grenades and fire lances, though not deployed at Yehuling. The Jin understood siege warfare, logistics, and fortification, but they did not understand steppe warfare. They had no experience fighting Mongol cavalry. The Jin had fought the Mongols before, skirmishes along the border in the 1190s, but never a major campaign. They underestimated Mongol mobility, Mongol archery, and Mongol willingness to operate in terrain the Jin considered impassable for cavalry. This is not stupidity. This is the fog of war combined with institutional bias. The Jin thought they knew how to fight cavalry because they had fought the Khitan in Xixia. They did not know the Mongols were different. The Yuan Shi records that Mongol spies reported Jin military deployments, harvest yields, and even personality assessments of Jin generals. Wanyan Jujin was known to be aggressive and proud, likely to accept battle if challenged. Genghis used this. He maneuvered his army to threaten Juyong Pass, provoking Wanyan Jujin to march his entire force into Yehuling, where terrain negated Jin numerical advantage. The Mongols did not stumble into a favorable battle. They engineered it. The Wenshi records that Mukhali received a fiefdom and the title of prince for his role at Yehuling. Jebe and Subutai, who executed the flanking maneuvers, were promoted to Noyan, high commanders. Meritocracy and fear combined to maintain cohesion under extreme conditions. The Mongols at Yehuling fought outnumbered in difficult terrain against an enemy that should have crushed them and never broke, because their command structure, training, and discipline were superior. Thus, another fragment from a provincial magistrate's report, November 1211. The pass is carpeted with the dead. No rites have been performed. The crows are so fat they cannot fly. The Jin Shi records that travelers avoided the pass for years due to evil air and the cries of ghosts. Modern archaeological teams reported that remains in the upper layers of the mass graves, those buried last or exposed longest, show carnivore gnaw marks consistent with scavenging by wolves and wild dogs. The battlefield was not cleaned. It was abandoned. Strategic lessons. Yehuling demonstrates that numerical superiority without mobility, flexibility, and appropriate doctrine is a liability, not an asset. The Jin had 16 times more soldiers than the Mongols and lost 16 times more. Terrain matters more than numbers. Reconnaissance and intelligence determine outcomes before battle starts. Decentralized command beats rigid hierarchy when conditions are chaotic, and armies that cannot adapt are destroyed by armies that can. And it began at a mountain pass, where 25,000 horsemen killed 300,000 soldiers in 3 days, proving that wars are not won by the largest armies, but by the best. Period. The Jin army, packed into a narrow corridor with inadequate water sources, suffered from heat exhaustion before the battle even started. The Jin Shi mentions great thirst among the troops. The pass has only 2 reliable water sources, a stream at the eastern entrance and a spring near the western exit, both documented in Ming Dynasty geographical surveys that reference earlier Tang and Jin records. 400,000 men require approximately 800,000 liters of water per day for minimal hydration, 2 liters per person. The stream flow rate in August, measured in modern hydrological studies, averages 40 liters per minute, providing 57,000 liters per day. Not enough. The Jin had to transport water from external sources or ration brutally. Dehydrated troops fight poorly, think slowly, and panic quickly. The Mongols carried fermented mare's milk and water in leather bags, and they controlled the high ground where cooler air and more reliable seeps existed. Small advantage. Cumulative. Each two-man commander received mission-type orders, objectives without detailed instructions on execution, and reported back only after task completion. The Secret History of the Mongols, compiled circa 1240, describes Genghis's method. He spoke the goal and the warriors found the way. Contrast this with the Jin command, which operated through a hierarchy requiring approvals from Wanyan Jujin for major tactical decisions. When Mongol cavalry appeared on the ridges, Jin battalion commanders sent runners to Wanyan Jujin for orders. The runners took 45 minutes to an hour to traverse the column. By the time orders returned, the situation had changed. The Mongols inside the decision loop, the Jin outside it. 100 to 350 kilograms and survives on sparse forage that would starve larger breeds. Archaeological evidence from Mongol period sites, stables, corrals, and sacrifice pits shows that Mongol war ponies retained these characteristics. Bone measurements from horse skeletons in 13th century Mongol graves, excavated at sites like Kermendov in Mongolia, and published in Journal of Archaeological Science. 2015 confirm. Average withers height of 1.32 meters, consistent with modern Mongol horses. These animals could travel 40 miles per day on minimal feed and still fight. A Jin war horse, larger and stronger, required 3 times the forage and could not maintain the same pace. At Yehuling, this translated into operational tempo. The Mongols moved before the Jin could respond, repositioned before the Jin could counter, and struck before the Jin could prepare. Speed is a weapon. But at Yehuling, the Jin cavalry could not close with the Mongols, could not charge uphill through forest, and exhausted their horses in the attempt. Mongol cavalry wore lighter armor, leather lamellar, sometimes reinforced with iron plates on the chest, or no armor at all, relying on mobility and archery. The Jami al-Tawarik states that Mongol warriors trusted the horse more than the breastplate. At Yehuling, they were proven right. Psychological warfare complemented physical destruction. The Mongols practiced calculated terror. Before Yehuling, during the approach to the pass, Mongol scouts captured Jin foragers and mutilated them, cutting off ears, noses, hands, and sent them back to the Jin lines. The Jin Shi records this: "The enemy returned our men disfigured so that fear spread." The Mongols also used noise. During the August 16th assault, Mongol cavalry banged on drums, blew horns, and shouted in coordination to create the impression of a larger force. This is documented in multiple sources, including the Yuanxi and later Persian histories. The Jin, already rattled by the ridge attacks, panicked. Units broke before contact. Panic is contagious. Once a few battalions fled, others followed, and the collapse cascaded through the entire Jin army. The Mongols did not need to kill every Jin soldier. They needed to break cohesion, and terror did half the work. The Yuanxi describes this in the context of Yehuling. "The enemy believed us beaten and pursued. Then we turned, and they were scattered. This tactic requires extraordinary discipline and horsemanship. The Mongols practiced it constantly. A feigned retreat at full gallop with units peeling off at designated points to set up the ambush demands precision and trust. The Jin had no counter. They saw cavalry fleeing and assumed victory, which is what the Mongols wanted them to assume. Heat. Create ideal vectors. Modern epidemiological models suggest that an army of 400,000 in a confined space would experience outbreak within 2 to 3 weeks. Sick soldiers fight poorly or not at all, and the Mongols, spread across a wider area and operating in smaller units, would have been less vulnerable. This is speculative but plausible, and it would explain why Jin resistance collapsed so quickly once the Mongols attacked. Genghis Khan's strategic calculation shows ruthless clarity. He could have raided the frontier and withdrawn, as steppe confederations had done for centuries. Instead, he chose to annihilate the Jin main army. Why? Because destroying the army eliminated Jin offensive capability, opened northern China to raiding, and forced negotiation from weakness. Yehuling was not about holding ground. It was about breaking the Jin state's ability to defend itself. The Jin, dependent on supply trains, could be interdicted. The Mongols could not. Wanyan Jujin himself was not punished because he was a prince. This protected incompetence at the highest levels. The Mongols promoted on merit. If you failed, you were demoted or killed. If you succeeded, you advanced. Bolt points are iron, designed for armor penetration. Swords show pattern-welded construction. The Jin had metallurgical knowledge comparable to contemporary European or Islamic smiths, but technology without doctrine is inert. Mortality from wounds in pre-modern warfare typically exceeded 50%, but Mongol wounded who survived the first 2 days often recovered because infection rates were lower. The secret history records Genghis saying, "Heaven has given us the Jin because they are weak." The Jin soldiers, conscripts from agricultural provinces, fought for a dynasty they did not love. Jin tax rates ran as high as 50%. When the battle turned, many deserted. The Mongols fought for loot, glory, and a leader they followed by choice. The Yuanxi records that Genghis took many Chinese who knew the crafts of war after Yehuling. These engineers built siege engines the Mongols used in 1212 to 1215. Ordinary soldiers were enslaved or killed. Fields were abandoned because farmers were dead, enslaved, or had fled south. The Jin Shi records grain shortages in Zhongdu by winter 1211, with prices increasing threefold over 1210 levels. By 1213, famine conditions prevailed in Hebei province. Starvation killed more people than combat. This is strategic devastation. The Mongols did not need to occupy the land. They made the land worthless to the Jin, which forced the Jin to spend resources. They did not have to stabilize regions they could no longer defend. The Jin state bled revenue and legitimacy simultaneously. Mongols could have been pinned and destroyed. Genghis gambled on Jin incompetence and Jin rigidity. And he was right, but the margin was not as wide as the outcome suggests. The Mongols at Yehuling operated on the edge of disaster, and one different decision by the Jin, one alert patrol, one scout report taken seriously, could have changed history. It did not. The Jin were not alert, and the Mongols executed flawlessly. The political fallout within the Jin court accelerated collapse. Wanyan Jujin retained command despite defeat because of royal connections. Other generals concluded that competence did not matter, only birth. The Jin military fractured into factions competing for resources, while the Mongols ravaged the frontier. Unity of command disintegrated. Detection to reconstruct battle dynamics. Concentrations of iron arrowheads on the northern ridge correspond to Mongol firing positions. Broken weapons in the central corridor mark the main killing zone. Human skeletal remains cluster in 7 locations, with the largest at the narrowest point where the Jin column was most compressed. Bone isotope analysis confirms the dead came from multiple regions: Shaanxi, Hebei, and southern Manchuria. Dental analysis shows ages from 16 to 50, majority between 20 and 35, consistent with a conscript army. This is a cross-section of Jin society, dead in a mountain pass. The core tactic, fix the enemy frontally, envelop from unexpected directions, destroy piecemeal, became standard Mongol doctrine. Chengdu held for 4 years but fell in 1215, shattering Jin resistance. The dynasty survived until 1234, but after Yehuling, it was never again a great power. The Mongols found the approaches, the Jin ignored and turned a defensive position into a trap. The Jin held the pass, the Mongols held the ridges won. Trauma analysis shows a penetrating arrow wound and trampling injuries. Burial dates to autumn 1211. Among the artifacts, a leather pouch containing 73 Mongol arrowheads collected from the battlefield, catalogued in the Hebei Provincial Museum. Each arrowhead represents a Jin soldier who will not return. 73 out of 300,000. The math is absurd. The evidence is not. And the man who collected those arrowheads understood what his dynasty refused to see until too late, that the Mongols were not raiders. They were an extinction event,